The morning started like any other on Research Station, Kepler 442b. Dr. Sarah Chen was running her usual scans of the planetary surface when something caught her attention. A small heat signature was moving through the ruins of what used to be the Zalani settlement below. "Computer, enhance Sector 7 Alpha," she commanded, leaning forward in her chair. The holographic display zoomed in, revealing a tiny figure stumbling through the wreckage. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. It was a child, a human child. This was impossible. The Zalani had wiped out the human colony on Kepler 442b 3 years ago. Every single person had been killed in their surprise attack. The Galactic Council had confirmed it. No survivors. 0. The humans who lived there were simple farmers and researchers, completely defenseless against the Zalani's advanced weapons. Sarah's hand shook as she activated the emergency beacon. Within minutes, Captain Marcus Rivera and his team were in the transport heading down to the surface. Sarah insisted on going with them, despite the captain's protests about safety protocols. The journey to the surface took 20 minutes. During that time, Sarah kept her eyes glued to the scanner, tracking the small heat signature. The child was still moving, but slowly, too slowly. They were clearly injured or sick. When they landed, the smell hit them first. Even through their environmental suits, the sensors picked up the lingering traces of death and decay. The Zalani had been thorough in their destruction. Buildings were reduced to rubble. The once green fields were now barren wasteland. They found the child hiding in what remained of a school building. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, with tangled blonde hair and clothes that were far too big for her small frame. She was clutching a stuffed animal that had seen better days. When she saw them, her eyes went wide with fear. She pressed herself against the wall, shaking her head frantically. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered in a voice so quiet they almost missed it through their communicators. Captain Rivera slowly removed his helmet, showing his face. "We're humans, sweetheart. We're here to help you. What's your name?" The little girl stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she spoke. "Emma. My name is Emma Thompson." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Thompson. She remembered that name from the colony records. Dr. James Thompson had been the head botanist. His wife Maria was a teacher. They had a daughter named Emma, who would be 8 years old now. "Emma, where have you been hiding all this time?" Sarah asked gently, kneeling down to the child's level. Emma's lower lip trembled. "In the caves. Daddy showed me the caves before they came. He made me promise to stay hidden no matter what. He said someone would come for me eventually." The caves. Of course. The planet was riddled with natural cave systems that the colonists had discovered but never fully mapped. The Zalani must not have known about them. As they carefully coaxed Emma out of her hiding spot, she began to tell them her story. For 3 years, this 8-year-old child had survived alone in the cave system. She had lived on fungus that grew in the caves, rainwater that collected in natural pools, and the emergency rations her father had hidden there. But the most heartbreaking part was what she had witnessed before going into hiding. "I saw them kill everyone," Emma said in that same quiet voice as they walked back to the transport. "The big lizard people with the shiny suits. They laughed when they did it. They thought it was funny." Sarah exchanged a look with Captain Rivera. The Zalani were indeed reptilian, and their armor did have a metallic sheen. But what Emma said next made their blood run cold. "They made Mommy and Daddy watch when they hurt my baby brother. They wanted them to see. They thought it was a game." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma continued walking, seemingly unaware of the impact her words had on the adults around her. To her, this was just what had happened. She had been living with these memories for 3 years. Back on the station, Emma was immediately taken to medical. Dr. Rodriguez, the station's chief medical officer, ran every test he could think of. Remarkably, the child was in relatively good health considering her ordeal. Malnourished, yes, but alive and mentally alert. What worried everyone was Emma's emotional state. She was too calm, too accepting of what had happened. She answered questions about her family's death with the same tone she might use to describe the weather. "She's in shock," Dr. Rodriguez explained to the senior staff. 3 years of trauma and isolation. It's amazing she's even functional. Captain Rivera was already composing his report to Earth Command. A survivor of the Kepler 442b massacre had been found. This would change everything. But what he didn't know was that Emma's rescue would set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of galactic civilization. The news reached Earth within hours thanks to quantum communication technology. Admiral Hayes, the head of Earth Defense Forces, read the report 3 times before he believed it. A survivor. After 3 years, there was finally a witness to what the Zilani had done to innocent human farmers and researchers. The Galactic Council had ruled the Kepler 442b incident a tragic misunderstanding. The Zilani claimed they had thought the human settlement was a military outpost. They paid a fine and promised to be more careful in the future. Case closed. But now there was Emma. Admiral Hayes called an emergency meeting of the Human Defense Council. Representatives from all of Earth's major nations gathered in the secure facility beneath Geneva. When Admiral Hayes played Emma's testimony, recorded during her initial debriefing, the room fell silent. "They made games out of killing us," Emma's small voice echoed through the chamber. "They kept score. The one with the blue markings on his face got the most points for killing Daddy because Daddy was big." General Patterson from the North American Federation was the first to speak. "This is a war crime, multiple war crimes." "The Galactic Council won't care," replied Ambassador Zhao from the Asian Alliance. "They've already ruled on this matter. To them, we're just a minor species that hasn't earned our place yet." Admiral Hayes stood up, his face grim. "Then perhaps it's time we earned our place." The meeting continued for 18 hours. Plans were made. Resources were allocated. For the first time since humanity had joined the galactic community 50 years ago, every human nation was united in purpose. Meanwhile, on the research station, Emma was slowly beginning to open up to Dr. Chen, who had volunteered to be her primary caretaker. The child seemed to trust women more than men, which wasn't surprising given what she had witnessed. "Will you help me remember them better?" Emma asked one evening as Sarah was tucking her into bed in the station's guest quarters. "Remember who, sweetheart?" "My family. Sometimes I forget what Mommy's laugh sounded like. Or how Daddy would hum when he was working in the garden." Sarah's heart broke a little more. "Of course. We can look at pictures and videos from the colony records. Would you like that?" Emma nodded eagerly. It was the first time Sarah had seen her show genuine emotion about anything. As Sarah dimmed the lights and prepared to leave, Emma called out to her. "Dr. Chen, do you think the lizard people will come back?" "No, honey. You're safe now, I promise." "Good," Emma said, snuggling with her stuffed animal. "I don't want them to hurt anyone else like they hurt my family." Sarah paused at the doorway. There was something in Emma's tone that made her look back. For just a moment in the dim light, she could have sworn she saw something other than childish innocence in Emma's eyes. Something harder, older. But when she looked again, Emma was just a traumatized child who had survived the unthinkable. 3 days later, the first ships of humanity's combined fleet began moving toward the edge of human space. They carried no flags or identification markings. Officially, they didn't exist. The Zilani hegemony controlled a dozen star systems and commanded one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. They were ancient, proud, and utterly convinced of their superiority over younger species like humanity. They had no idea what was coming for them. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, watching the stars wheel by outside the viewports. In his quarters, he kept a photo of Emma Thompson, the little girl whose testimony had started this war. She was smiling in the picture, taken before her world was destroyed. Soon, he thought. Soon the Zalani would learn that humanity did not forgive, and they definitely did not forget. The message pods had been launched to every human colony and station. The same simple message was broadcast on all frequencies. Remember Kepler 442b. Remember Emma Thompson. Remember that we do not abandon our children. Across human space, ships began to move. Merchant vessels that were secretly armed, science ships with hidden weapon pods, even civilian transports carrying emergency supplies to various destinations. Humanity was going to war, not the clean, civilized warfare of the Galactic Council with its rules and regulations. This would be something far more primitive and infinitely more terrifying. The Zalani had made one critical mistake when they destroyed the human colony. They had left a witness. A single child who would grow up to remember what they had done to her family. And humanity would make sure the galaxy never forgot either. The Zalani homeworld of Cythera Prime was a marvel of engineering and natural beauty. Crystalline towers reached toward twin suns, while floating gardens drifted through the upper atmosphere. For 5,000 years, the Zalani had ruled their domain with absolute confidence in their superiority. High Commander Vexathul was reviewing trade reports in his private chamber when his aide burst through the doors without announcing himself. Such behavior was unthinkable under normal circumstances. "Commander, we have a situation," the aide panted, his scales shifting to the pale blue of extreme stress. "Our outpost at Kepler Prime has gone silent." Vexthul set down his datapad slowly. Kepler Prime was a mining station in the outer territories, staffed by 1,000 Zalani workers and defended by a full military garrison. "Equipment failure?" "No, sir. We received a partial transmission before they went dark. They were under attack." "By whom?" "There are no hostile species in that sector." The aide's scales shifted to an even paler shade. "The transmission mentioned human ships, sir. But that's impossible. Humans don't have the technology or the courage to attack us." Vexthul stood up, his massive frame towering over his subordinate. In his mind, he briefly recalled the human colony they had eliminated 3 years ago. It had been a minor action, hardly worth remembering. The humans had put up no resistance at all. "Send a reconnaissance fleet to investigate," he ordered. "If humans are somehow involved, we'll remind them of their place in the galactic order." What Vexthul didn't know was that Kepler Prime had been the first of many targets. Human strike teams had been planning this operation for months, studying Zalani bases and identifying vulnerabilities. They had learned to fight the way humans had always fought best, smart, dirty, and without mercy. The attack on Kepler Prime had lasted exactly 17 minutes. The human ships had emerged from hyperspace in perfect coordination, their weapons already locked onto critical targets. They had destroyed the communications array first, then systematically eliminated the defensive platforms. But the most terrifying part hadn't been the attack itself. It had been what the humans left behind. When the Zalani reconnaissance fleet arrived at Kepler Prime 3 days later, they found the station intact but completely deserted. Every single Zalani had vanished without a trace. No bodies, no signs of struggle, nothing. Just empty corridors and the lingering sense that something terrible had happened. The only clue was a message burned into the main computer core in ancient human script. "One child suffered." Admiral Hayes watched the reconnaissance reports come in from his command ship deep in human space. The psychological warfare was working perfectly. The Zalani were used to crushing inferior species through overwhelming force. They had no experience dealing with an enemy that could strike without warning and disappear like ghosts. "Phase 2 is ready to begin," reported Colonel Sarah Martinez, his chief of operations. All teams are in position. Hayes nodded grimly. Phase 2 would escalate things considerably. But after seeing Emma's testimony, after learning what the Zalani had done to innocent families, he felt no hesitation. Execute Phase 2, he ordered. Across Zalani space, the attacks began simultaneously. Mining colonies, research stations, military outposts, all targeted with surgical precision. But these weren't random acts of violence. Each target was chosen for its psychological impact. The Zalani research facility that had been developing new weapons was found abandoned, its staff simply gone. The military academy where young Zalani learned tactics was discovered empty, with all the students and instructors vanished without a trace. And at each site, the humans left the same message. One child suffered. Within a week, panic was spreading through Zalani space. Their military commanders demanded action, but how do you fight an enemy you can't find? How do you protect against attacks that leave no witnesses? High Commander Vex Thul called an emergency session of the Zalani War Council. The greatest military minds of their species gathered in the crystalline war room at the heart of Cythera Prime. Status report, Vex Thul commanded, as the assembled commanders took their places. Fleet Commander Krathos spoke first, his scales displaying the orange patterns of frustration. 23 installations have been hit in the past week. No survivors, no witnesses, no clues except that ridiculous human message. How many troops have we lost? Asked Defense Coordinator Zephyra. That's just it, Krathos replied, his scales shifting to confused purple. We haven't found any bodies. Our people are simply gone. Taken prisoner? Suggested someone from the back of the room. Impossible. There's no way humans could transport that many prisoners without leaving some trace. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If the humans weren't taking prisoners and they weren't leaving bodies, then what were they doing with thousands of captured Zalani? War Master Thexuna, the oldest and most experienced commander present, finally spoke. Perhaps we are approaching this wrong. We keep thinking of humans as a minor species, barely worthy of our attention. But what if we've underestimated them? Several commanders hissed in disagreement. The idea that humans could pose a real threat to the mighty Zalani hegemony was almost unthinkable. I was there during the Kepler incident 3 years ago, Thexuna continued. We assumed it would be a simple matter to remove the human settlement. And it was. Perhaps too simple. They offered no resistance, as if they were watching, learning. Vex Thul's scales darkened with anger. You're suggesting they allowed us to slaughter their people? I'm suggesting that humans think differently than we do. We value honor in battle, face-to-face combat, victory through superior strength. But humans, they're survivors. They adapt. They learn from defeats and come back stronger. Before anyone could respond, an aide rushed into the chamber. His scales were pure white, the color of absolute terror. Commanders, he gasped, we've received a transmission from the humans. It's addressed to High Commander Vex Thul personally. The chamber fell silent. In their entire recorded history, no enemy species had ever dared to directly address a Zalani High Commander. Put it through, Vex Thul ordered, his voice deadly calm. The holographic projector activated, and suddenly the war room was filled with the image of a small human child. She appeared to be around 8 years old, with blonde hair and blue eyes. She sat in what looked like a simple chair in a simple room. Hello, the child said in a voice that was eerily calm. My name is Emma Thompson. 3 years ago, you came to my home on Kepler 442b. You killed my mommy and daddy and my baby brother. You made them watch each other die because you thought it was funny. Every Zalani in the room was frozen in shock. This was impossible. They had killed everyone on that colony. There were no survivors. Emma continued speaking in that same calm, measured voice. I hid in the caves like Daddy told me to. I waited. I listened. I remembered everything you did, every laugh, every joke you made while my family screamed. Vexthul felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death in battle, which was honorable, but cold, creeping terror. I want you to know, Emma said, still smiling that innocent child's smile, that I told the other humans what you did. I told them about the games you played with our pain. I told them how you kept score. The hologram flickered slightly, and when it stabilized, Emma's smile had changed somehow. It was still a child's smile, but there was something ancient and terrible in her eyes. The humans asked me what I wanted them to do about it, she continued. I told them I wanted your people to understand what it feels like to lose everyone you care about. I wanted them to know what it's like to be alone and afraid. Vexthul tried to speak but found his voice caught in his throat. So they're taking your people to the same caves where I hid, Emma said conversationally. They're going to keep them there until they learn what I learned. How to survive alone. How to remember everyone they lost. How to live with the knowledge that no one is coming to save them. The hologram began to fade, but Emma's voice continued. This is just the beginning, she said softly. We're going to take everyone you love, every soldier, every worker, every child, and we're going to teach them what you taught me. What it means to suffer. The transmission ended, leaving the Zilani War Council in stunned silence. War Master Thexuna was the first to find his voice. We need to evacuate the civilian population immediately. Evacuate to where? Kratos demanded. They're hitting targets across our entire space. There's nowhere safe. Then we fight, Vexthul declared, his scales shifting to the deep red of rage. We mobilize every ship, every soldier. We hunt down these humans and show them what real warfare looks like. But even as he spoke the words, Vexthul knew something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in Zilani history, they were not the hunters. They had become the prey. Meanwhile, in the hidden depths of human space, Admiral Hayes reviewed the reports coming in from the field teams. The psychological campaign was working better than expected. Zilani military forces were being pulled back from border regions to protect the homeworld. Their trade networks were collapsing as fear spread through their colonies. But Hayes knew this was just the beginning. The real war hadn't even started yet. How is Emma doing? He asked Dr. Chen, who had accompanied the child to the secret military facility where the recording had been made. She's adapting, Chen replied carefully. The trauma counselors say she's processing her experiences in a very mature way. Almost too mature for someone her age. Hayes nodded. Emma Thompson had become the symbol of human resolve, the living reminder of why they were fighting. But sometimes, when he looked at her, he wondered if they had saved a child or awakened something far more dangerous. Not that it mattered now. The die had been cast. Humanity had committed itself to a war that would end only when the Zilani hegemony was nothing but a memory. And at the center of it all was a little girl who had learned to survive in the dark, waiting for the day when the universe would finally understand the price of making humanity's children suffer. 6 months had passed since the first human attacks began. The mighty Zilani hegemony, which had dominated this sector of the galaxy for 5 millennia, was crumbling from within. High Commander Vexthul stood in his private chambers, staring out at the city below. What had once been the jewel of Zilani civilization now looked like a fortress under siege. Military checkpoints blocked every street. Patrol ships circled the towers endlessly. The floating gardens had been recalled to create defensive barriers. And still, the humans came. They didn't attack in massive fleets or with overwhelming force. They were like a plague that infected everything they touched. Supply ships would leave port and never arrive at their destination. Military patrols would respond to distress calls and vanish without a trace. Entire colonies would go silent overnight, leaving behind empty buildings and that same haunting message: one child suffered. "Commander," his aide announced from the doorway, "the War Council is assembled." Vex Thul turned away from the window. In 6 months, he had aged what felt like decades. His once proud scales had dulled to a sickly gray, and his eyes held the haunted look of someone who had seen the impossible become reality. The war room that had once buzzed with confident commanders was now half empty. Many of the Zalani's greatest military minds had simply disappeared during what should have been routine missions. Others had requested transfers to distant outposts, hoping to escape the growing madness of the core worlds. "Status report," Vex Thul commanded, though he dreaded hearing the answer. Fleet Commander Krathos, one of the few senior officers still present, consulted his datapad with shaking hands. "In the past week, we've lost contact with 17 more installations. The mining colony at Zarion 7, the research facility on Morn's Edge, 3 military outposts in the Outer Ring. Survivors? None found. As always, the installations are left intact but completely empty. No signs of struggle, no bodies, just nothing." Defense Coordinator Zephyra spoke up from her position near the tactical display. "Our intelligence networks have intercepted something disturbing. The humans aren't just taking our people to caves as they threatened, they're doing something else with them." "Explain," Vex Thul ordered. "Some of our missing personnel have been spotted in human territories, but they're not prisoners. They appear to be integrated, working alongside humans, living among them." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Zalani had always prided themselves on their racial purity, their superiority over other species. The idea that their people might willingly join human society was more horrifying than death. "Impossible," whispered War Master Thexuna. "No Zalani would betray their own species." "Unless," Zephyra continued reluctantly, "they've been somehow altered, brainwashed, or worse." Before anyone could respond, the chamber's communication system activated without any input from the operators. The same innocent face that had haunted their nightmares for months appeared on the holographic display. Emma Thompson looked exactly the same as she had in the first transmission. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same child's face. But everyone in the room could sense the presence behind those eyes had grown stronger, more focused. "Hello again," Emma said in that eerily calm voice that had become the sound of their doom. "I wanted to give you an update on how things are going." Vex Thul found his voice through sheer force of will. "What have you done with our people?" Emma tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "We're teaching them what you taught me. How to survive when everything you love is taken away. How to find new families when your old ones are gone. You're holding them prisoner." "No," Emma replied with that innocent smile. "We're giving them a choice. Stay trapped in the hatred that you created or learn to build something better. It's amazing how many of them choose to build." The hologram shifted, and suddenly the war room was filled with images from across human space. Zalani working in human factories. Zalani children playing with human children. Zalani scientists collaborating on research projects. Zalani families living peacefully in human cities. "You see," Emma continued, "we learned something interesting about your people. When you remove them from your society's constant pressure to dominate and destroy, they're actually quite nice. They make wonderful friends, excellent neighbors. Some of them have even started families with humans." Several Zalani commanders hissed in disgust, but Emma ignored them. "But I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "You're wondering why we haven't just killed you all like you killed my family. Why we're playing these games instead of using our weapons to destroy you." Vexthul realized he was indeed wondering exactly that. Humans had demonstrated they could strike anywhere, any time. They could have turned Cythera Prime into a crater months ago. The answer is simple, Emma continued. We want you to understand what you did. We want you to feel what we felt when you took everything from us. You need to know what it's like to watch your civilization disappear piece by piece while you stand helpless to stop it. The images on the hologram changed again. This time they showed empty Zalani cities, abandoned military bases, silent trade routes. The hegemony's infrastructure was collapsing as fear and paranoia spread through their society. But we're not monsters like you are, Emma said, her child's voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. We're offering your people a way out, a chance to join something better than what you had. All they have to do is reject the hatred and violence that defined your empire. And if they refuse? Vexthul asked, though he dreaded the answer. Emma's smile never wavered. Then they can stay in the caves and think about what they've done. Forever, if necessary. The hologram began to fade, but Emma's voice continued. I want you to know, High Commander Vexthul, that we know exactly where you are right now. We could take you anytime we want, but we're going to let you watch your empire fall apart first. We want you to experience every moment of helplessness that my parents felt when you murdered them. The transmission ended, leaving the War Council in horrified silence. War Master Thexuna was the first to speak. It's over, he said quietly. We've lost. Never, Vexthul snarled, his scales flashing angry red. We still have our core fleets, our homeworld defenses. We can make them pay for what they've done. With what? Krathos demanded. Half our ships have crews that might defect to the humans at any moment. The other half are too scared to leave port. Our people don't trust each other anymore. Then we fight with what we have, Vexthul declared. I'd rather die in battle than surrender to these creatures. You're not thinking clearly, Thexuna replied sadly. This isn't about military victory anymore. The humans have already won. They've turned our greatest strength, our unity, into our greatest weakness. We can't fight an enemy that our own people are joining voluntarily. As if summoned by their discussion, another aide rushed into the chamber. His scales were the pure white of terror, and his voice shook as he delivered his report. Commanders, we've received surrender requests from 12 more colonies in the past hour. They're asking for safe passage to human space. Refused, Vexthul snapped immediately. Sir, they're threatening to disable their defense networks if we don't allow them to leave. Some of them have families who've already defected to the humans. They want to be reunited. The truth hit Vexthul like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been taking random prisoners. They had been systematically targeting specific individuals, family members, friends, loved ones. They had created a network of connections that was now pulling Zalani society apart from within. How many of our people are left? He asked quietly. The aide consulted his datapad. Approximately 30% of our original population remains in hegemony space. The rest have either disappeared or requested asylum with the humans. 30%. In 6 months. The humans had convinced 70% of the Zalani population to abandon their empire, not through force or coercion, but by offering them something the hegemony never had, the possibility of peace. Over the following weeks, the collapse accelerated. Military units disbanded as soldiers chose to join their families in human space rather than continue a war they no longer believed in. Government officials abandoned their posts to start new lives among the humans. Even some members of the ruling council quietly disappeared in the night. Vexthul found himself commanding an ever-shrinking domain of die-hard loyalists who refused to accept the new reality. They held Cythera Prime and a handful of other core worlds, but their empire was effectively dead. The final transmission came exactly 1 year after Emma's first message. This time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her were dozens of Zelani children, all smiling, all happy, all clearly well cared for. "Hello, High Commander," Emma said. "I wanted you to meet some friends of mine. These are Zelani children whose parents chose to join human society rather than continue living in fear and hatred." One of the Zelani children stepped forward, a young male with bright green scales and curious eyes. "My name is Kextor," he said in perfect English. "I wanted to thank the humans for showing my family a better way to live." Other children began speaking, sharing stories of their new lives among humans. They talked about schools where they learned cooperation instead of conquest, communities where different species worked together for common goals, families that weren't defined by race or species, but by love and mutual care. "You see," Emma said as the children's voices faded, "this was never about revenge. It was about teaching you that there's a better way to live. Your empire was built on the pain and fear of others. But look what happens when you build something on love and hope instead." The hologram shifted to show images from across human space. Zelani and human children playing together, mixed families celebrating holidays from both cultures, former enemies working side by side to build a better future. "We're offering you one last chance, High Commander," Emma continued. "Lay down your weapons. Abandon your hatred. Come and see what your people have built with us. You might be surprised at what you find." Vexthul stared at the hologram for a long moment. Around him, the few remaining members of his war council waited for his response. Outside the windows, Cythera Prime's beautiful crystalline towers stood empty, their former inhabitants having chosen a different path. "What if I refuse?" he asked finally. Emma's expression didn't change. "Then you can stay here with your hatred and your pride, but you'll be alone. The last Zelani in a dead empire, keeper of nothing but bitter memories." The transmission ended, leaving Vexthul alone with his thoughts. 3 days later, a single human transport ship approached Cythera Prime. It carried no weapons, no soldiers, only a small diplomatic crew and one very important passenger. Emma Thompson, now 9 years old but somehow carrying herself with the dignity of someone much older, walked through the abandoned corridors of the Zelani capital. Her footsteps echoed in the empty halls where the mightiest empire in this sector had once ruled. She found Vexthul in his private chamber, sitting alone and staring out at his empty city. "Hello?" she said simply. Vexthul turned to look at her, this small human child who had brought down an empire without firing a single shot in anger. "Are you here to gloat?" he asked. "No," Emma replied, moving to stand beside him at the window. "I'm here to ask if you'd like to come home with me." "Home?" "To meet your people. The real ones. Not the ones trapped by fear and hatred. They miss you, you know. Many of them have asked about you." Vexthul looked down at this remarkable child. "Why would you want me after what I did to your family?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "Because holding on to anger hurts the person holding it more than anyone else. I learned that in the caves. Hatred would have destroyed me, just like it destroyed your empire. I chose to build something better instead." She held out her small hand to the former High Commander of the Zelani hegemony. "The question is, what will you choose?" For the first time in over a year, Vexthul felt something other than despair. Looking into Emma's eyes, he saw not the vengeful child he had expected, but someone who had learned to transform pain into hope. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. The Zelani Empire was dead. But from its ashes, something unprecedented was being born, a true galactic community where species worked together instead of dominating each other. And at the heart of it all was a small girl who had learned that the greatest victory wasn't destroying your enemies, but helping them become something better than they were. The galaxy would remember this day as the moment when humanity truly earned its place among the stars, not through conquest or destruction, but through the simple revolutionary idea that even the worst enemy could be redeemed. One child had suffered. But from that suffering, billions had learned to live in peace.